One of the huge challenges that stands in the way of reimagining the movement to end gender violence is what's entrenched. We have created a huge bureaucracy funded by the federal government and endorsed by those who receive that funding that centers around the criminalization of domestic violence, the criminalization largely of low-income people of color. And those people are not eager to give up either the resources or the ideologies that kind of highlight or support that framework. And so moving beyond those frameworks means bringing in those mainstream organizations and helping them to see that the challenges of others are our challenges as well. That when we incarcerate scores of low-income men of color, we're not really doing anything about domestic violence. We're just adding to the structural inequality in our country. So to me, the biggest challenge is, one, helping people to see that while there are many struggles, there is one common struggle as well. And two, getting people to see that just because funding is set up in a certain way, or just because they've had a domain for a certain amount of time, doesn't mean that there's not a need to restructure. We need to reimagine the movement to end gender violence because we're stymied a bit in the way that we think about gender violence, in our sources of funding, in our priorities. So many of us came at this from different places, from a domestic violence movement, from a sexual assault movement, from a workers' rights movement. What we failed to see is that we're in a common struggle. And the movement right now is very siloed. So we're not particularly in a common struggle. The funding sources don't support our commonality. The way that we think about these issues don't support our commonality. And so reimagining the move to end gender violence means thinking across these silos, thinking about the way that workers' rights is connected to domestic violence, is connected to sexual assault, is connected to the needs of the hyper-incarcerated, is connected to the needs of undocumented people. And figuring out how in each of the individual work that we're doing, we can all play a part in this common struggle to try to address some of the structural problems that are reinforcing all of these forms of gender violence. For 20 years, I've done work on domestic violence, not sexual assault, not other kinds of issues, but domestic violence. Last year, I started a gender violence clinic and did that because I wanted to think about the variety of places where gender and violence were touching each other. And what that meant for me was to take on cases as a lawyer involving sexual assault and domestic violence, but also a parole petition for a woman who's been incarcerated since she was 15 and who joined the gang that led to the crime largely because of her abusive boyfriend. Or to take on gender identity discrimination, so that when violence is done to someone because of that gender identity, violence in the form of denial of who they are, that's something that we would be responding to.